Welcome, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, and in some cases, good evening. I'm Professor Michael Weingrad, and I would like to welcome you all to the 2022 Laurie I. Lokey event at Portland State University. I want to thank the generosity of Mr. Lokey and to thank our co-sponsors, the Department of English and the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, and also to give a personal thank you to Suzanne Van Amberg for helping organize this event. Most of all, I want to tell you all that this wonderful event we're about to enjoy is standalone and also preparation. The occasion for this lecture was the publication several months ago of the English translation of the Books of Jacob, an extraordinary novel by the Polish Nobel-prizewinning author Olga Tokarczuk. This epic novel follows the career of the historical figure Jacob Frank through a landscape the world is very much focused on today, that of Ukraine. And the novel imagines the world of the 18th century in its strangeness and also with its present-day resonances. On Sunday, May 15th, the same time as now, we will therefore gather for a book discussion of the novel with readers from around the world. And I invite you to read the novel and to join us then as well. And we'll have a link to that event for information and registration in the chat right now. We will be joined at that time by the novel's translator, Jennifer Croft, and two other wonderful guests who will join in the conversation, but mainly that will be an opportunity for us to read and talk and listen with our fellow book lovers from America, the UK, Poland, Israel, and elsewhere. So please do join us. Now, I'm delighted to introduce the scholar who can best explain to us the real historical background to this novel. Professor Pawel Maciejko is the internationally recognized expert on the dark and often myth-enshrouded history of Jacob Frank. He is the author of the wonderful award-winning study, The Mixed Multitude, Jacob Frank and the Frankist Movement, 1755 to 1816. His academic career has spanned the University of Warsaw, Oxford University, the University of Chicago, and the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and he currently holds the chair in classical Judaism at Johns Hopkins University. He is currently working on several fascinating projects, including one concerning heresy and conversion to Christianity in modern Jewish history. And so on this Palm Sunday, I welcome you, Professor Maciejko, and look forward to learning from you.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you very much for inviting me to this event. I must confess, my book on Frankism came out almost 12 years ago. So for me, it's an old story. Since then, I haven't been really working on Frankism, even though I have been working on matters that are related to Frankism in many ways. So I'm very happy to go back to it and tell you a little bit about Jacob Frank and the Frankist movement. What I'm going to do is to try to highlight three respects in which, in my opinion, the Frankist movement was very unusual and perhaps unique among other Jewish religious movements of the early modern period. And I will do it through essentially, I want to tell you a story. I will tell you a story of the beginnings of the Frankist movement. I will not be talking about the entire history of Frankism, but I want to tell you how it all started and get more or less to the conversion of the Frankists to the Frankists to Roman Catholicism in 1759, 1760. But let's begin from the beginning. First of all, Frankism, as I'm sure you all know, developed as an kind of offshoot of an earlier messianic movement, a much larger messianic movement, arguably the largest messianic movement in Jewish history, that being Sabbatianism. The movement initiated by Shabtai Tzvi, the Messiah claimant, in the mid-17th century. Shabtai pronounced himself the Messiah first in 1648, then subsequently in 1665, and initiated what, second largest. The largest was Christianity, of course. But if you discount Christianity, then Sabbatianism was probably the largest messianic movement in Jewish history. Sabbatianism as a mass movement ended with the conversion of Shabtai Tzvi to Islam in 1666. But what is unusual and interesting about it is the fact that despite the conversion of Shabtai Tzvi, some of his followers continued to consider him the true Messiah, right? In other words, you have a situation in which you have a group of Jews who believe that the true Messiah, the Redeemer of the people of Israel, has to adopt another religion. And they continue to exist as a clandestine sect within Judaism. They continue to exist well into the 19th century. Now, Frankism developed as a kind of continuation, at the same time rejection of Sabbatianism. The founder of the Frankist movement, Jacob Frank, was born around 1726. We don't know exactly because there are contradictions in the sources, in Podolia, in today's Ukraine, back then the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. And he was born into a Sabbatian family. This we know for certain. He grew up in a Sabbatian milieu. He grew up among Sabbatian sectarians in what is today Ukraine. Very shortly after his birth, his parents moved to the Ottoman Empire. Probably, most likely, they moved because of a series of persecutions of the Sabbatian sectarians by the rabbinic establishment at that time. And Frank grew up wandering in the Ottoman Empire, in the Balkans, in Greece. Spent some time in Constantinople, spent some time in Salonika, and in 1755. He returned to Poland as an emissary of Turkish believers in Shabtai Tzvi to Polish believers in Shabtai Tzvi. And this is when the history of Frankism as a separate movement really begins, when Frank gets back to Poland from Turkey and starts gaining following in Podolia. It's very difficult to assess how big his following is at that time. It's really very difficult to say anything about that time because at this very early stage we have very, very, very few sources. But apparently he is successful. And then in January 1756, Frank and a group of his followers are conducting a ritual in a house in a village called Lanskoronie, which is close to the Polish-Turkish border. Now we have 11 different accounts of this ritual, and in my book, I'm juxtaposing these different accounts, trying to understand what really happened there. I will not give you the full story of many different accounts and what kind of light they shed on the event, but roughly what happened is that Frank and his followers were dancing around a naked woman on whose head they placed the tiara, the crown of the Torah scroll. They were singing songs and kissing her naked breasts, and they celebrated with what one account, Rabbi Yaakov Emden's account, calls lechem v'yein anoshim, bread and wine of the condemned. Now, the local Jews got a little upset about this story, and there is a subplot of the story how they were discovered and why they were discovered, but they were discovered by local non-Sabbatian Jews who got them arrested by the local authorities and asked the local Bet Din, the local rabbinic court, to start an investigation into this affair. Now, what's unusual about the story is that nothing is unusual in the story. In other words, if you look at the history of Sabbatian sectarianism in the first half of the 18th century, this is one of many ceremonies during which a sectarian group is conducting a ritual that involves ritual violations of Jewish religious law, and has a strong sexual component, let's call it, right? There are different accounts and different stories, but we have more stories like this, and we have more cases in which the sectarians were caught and the issue made it to a rabbinic court. But what happened in the case of the Frankists, and this is the first, I told you that there are three highly unusual elements here, and this is the first one, is that the rabbinic authorities went further than they did in previous cases. In previous cases, it's essentially what would happen, what normally happened in cases like this, is that the rabbinic court would look into the matter and quite likely put the participants in such rituals under a ban of excommunication. This is what would normally happen, and this also happened in this case. But something else happened as well. And this other element is crucial here, namely the rabbis investigating the issue not only pronounced the ban of excommunication on Frank and his followers, but they also approached the local Christian authorities. They petitioned the Bishop of Kamieniec-Podolski, Mikołaj Dębowski, in whose diocese the event took place. And they came to the bishop and said, look, we have a bunch of very dangerous heretics on our hands. We believe that you, the Christians, should do to them what you do to your own heretics, namely, you should burn them at the stake. And this is unusual. It's highly unusual and possibly unprecedented that the Jewish authorities ask Christian authorities for help in eradicating an internal Jewish heresy. They ask the bishop's court to get involved in an internal Jewish matter, and they go as far as to claim that these people are so dangerous that they actually should be burned at the stake. Just for the record, nobody's burning heretics at the stake. In 18th century Poland, but there is still some memory of the fact that heretics were burned by Christian authorities, and the rabbis are clearly, this is what they're asking. Now, the question I am asking in my book is why? What was so terrible, what was so strange, what was so unusual about the ritual of the Frankists in Lanskoronie that the rabbinic authorities went that far? And the answer to this, and again, right now I'm just going to say it in the book, I'm developing it much further, is that it's not so much of what would people assume it is, namely the fact that they were dancing around a naked woman and all this sexual, non-normative antinomian aspect. But what the rabbis got really upset about, or what they were afraid of, was the presence of Christian elements in the ceremony. So this bread and wine of the condemned was clearly interpreted as a kind of imitation, parody of the Christian Eucharist. And the rabbinic authorities were afraid that a Jewish religious ritual, heretical as it may be, that somehow resembles Christian rituals, may put all Jews in danger. And therefore they decided to preempt it and went to the Christians and asked them to handle this. Now, this move, going to the Christians, is something that did not happen in the earlier history of Sabbatianism, and to my knowledge, there are very few instances in which the rabbinic authorities are asking Christians to burn other Jews at the stake. Now, Frank's reaction to this was equally unusual. Namely, in order to defend himself, Frank decided to play the game and said that indeed the reason why the rabbis are persecuting them, the reason why the rabbis want to burn them at the stake, is the proximity of their belief to Christianity. Now, at that point, Frank, of course, doesn't say that they want to convert to Christianity or they want to become Christian or anything like this. What he's saying is something else. He's essentially saying, in front of the bishop's court, that he and his sect, he and his followers, are a group of Jews who are professing a version of Judaism that's closer to Christianity than rabbinic Judaism, right? We are Jews. We want to remain Jews. We are not Christians, but we belong to a Jewish group which, in many regards, agrees with the Christians on specific tenets of belief, such as, for instance, like the Christians, we believe that the Messiah has already come, right? He doesn't say that Jesus is the Messiah. He says, but we agree with the Christians on this specific point. The Messiah is already has come. We agree with the Christians that there will be no kibbutz galuyot and migration of the Jews to the state of Israel to rebuild the temple. We agree with the Christians on the possibility of the incarnation, of the fact that God can become human. Right? Again, he's not saying we are talking about Jesus of Nazareth, right? But the very possibility of incarnation, we accept this. We accept some form of the doctrine of the Trinity. So we are the Jews, but we agree with the Christians on many points, and we ask the Christian authorities of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth to recognize our form of Judaism as a legitimate form of Judaism within the Commonwealth, to legalize it, so that every Jew in Poland, Lithuania, can choose whether he wants to be a Talmudic Jew or he wants to belong to our form of Judaism. Just like today's America, every Jew can decide whether they want to be Reform or Conservative or Orthodox or not belonging to anything. Now, in Poland of that time, there is a precedent for this kind of situation. And again, this is not part of the story, but this is, to my knowledge, the only place in the world where there is the legal system, the law of the land recognizes more than one form of Judaism. And there's another form of Judaism, are the Karaites. Is the Karaite sect in Lithuania. And on paper, every Jew in Poland, Lithuania can choose whether they want to be a Rabbinate Jew or a Karaite Jew. Now, if there are two denominations of Judaism, if there are two legitimate forms of Judaism, there's no reason why there shouldn't be three. And this is what Frank and his followers are requesting from the church authorities. More than that, they are requesting a public disputation with the rabbis to prove that their form of Judaism is legitimate and should be accepted and recognized by the authorities. Now, the disputation takes place in Kamieniec-Podolski in the summer 1757. And not very surprisingly, the bishop pronounced the Frankists winners in this disputation. So for this moment, for this brief very moment onward, Frank and his followers clearly have the upper hand, and there is a chance that Sabbatian Judaism, which is not called Sabbatian Judaism, it's called anti-Talmudic Judaism, for the purpose of the disputation, will be recognized as a legitimate form of Judaism in Poland, Lithuania. Now, fortunately for the normative Judaism, for the rabbinate, very shortly after the disputation, the bishop who supported the Frankists suddenly dies, and there begin a period of actual persecution of Frank and his followers by the Jewish authorities. Actual persecution, I mean physical violence. People are getting killed, and Frank and a group of his followers escape Poland. They escape to the Ottoman Empire. Some of them, including Frank, convert to Islam in order to escape the persecution. Ostensibly, the story is over, but it isn't. At that time in Poland, as I said, the heretics are not being burned at the stakes, but you do have a wave of ritual murder accusations, of the blood libels. And in particular, there is another bishop, eighteenth-century, the Bishop of Krakow, who is involved in several ritual murder, two ritual murder trials. And the problem of Bishop Sautyk is that people don't believe him, that he's overdoing it, that people think that he's actually essentially doctoring the trials in order to extract money from the accused Jews. And since Sautyk is in trouble, he learns about the persecution of the Frankists by the rabbinate, and proposes Frank a deal. The Frankists will be allowed to return to Poland, will be offered his protection, and will be allowed to extract revenge on the rabbinate if they attest to the truth of the blood libel, if they say that the Jews indeed kill Christian babies for ritual purposes. Frank and his followers agree, and the second disputation is staged in Lviv in 1759. This disputation repeats some motions from the first disputation from Kamenets, but the main motion is a motion about the ritual murder, and this is the second highly unusual element of Frankism. The cases, the blood libel is a big taboo in Jewish history, and cases in which it is used as a weapon in internal Jewish conflicts are extremely rare. It's not completely unprecedented, but there are really very, very few cases in which the Jews accuse other Jews of killing Christian babies for the purpose of internal Jewish polemics. Michael mentioned at the beginning my work on apostasy, on conversion. This is characteristic even for the converts. In other words, even in cases where you have Jews converting to Christianity and then writing anti-Jewish works, which is not uncommon. There are literally dozens of books like this. When it comes to the blood libel, they stop short. Right? They're saying the Jews are doing all kinds of terrible things, but they're not killing babies in order to extract their blood for the Passover ritual. So in this case, this taboo is broken, and the Frankists are participating in the disputation on the blood libel. Just to make it clear, the point in the disputation, the motion in the disputation, is not attesting to the truth of a particular ritual murder accusation, right? It's not about saying in such and such place, such and such person was killed by the Jews. The claim is much stronger. The claim is that the ritual murder, or human sacrifice, if you will, is an intrinsic part of the Jewish religion. That this is not only what the Jews happen to do sometimes, but this is what the Jews are supposed to do as a principle of their religion, and that one can demonstrate it on the basis of reading the Talmud, Shulchan Aruch, some Kabbalistic works, and so on and so forth. So this is the motion for the disputation, right? That essentially Judaism is a religion in which human sacrifice is one of the essential elements, and it is, of course, being performed. Now, this disputation, unlike the first disputation, does not have a definite result. The collegium of the bishops that is presiding in the Lviv disputation decides that they cannot decides that they cannot pronounce a decisive verdict. Again, in my book, I'm describing the reasons for this. To make the long story short, wait, I need a glass of water. I'm sorry. Okay. To make the long story short, the church believes that if they decided that the Jews really kill Christian babies, really have to kill Christian babies, they would need to at least expel them from Poland, right? You just cannot have something like this around, and this is not the course of action the church really wants to take. There are many economic ties between the church and the Jews in Poland. Some bishops are much more liberal than one would expect, and nobody really wants to initiate, not nobody, but the majority of the does not really want to go so far with anti-Jewish accusations. So the disputation is unresolved. And then the question comes, what to do with the Frankists after that, right? After they publicly accused other Jews of the blood libel, it's clear that after something like this, they cannot remain within the framework of the institutional Judaism. What they hope for is going back in time to the first disputation and getting the legal recognition of Sabbatianism that they were promised by the bishop of Kamieniec, but apparently this is also not on the table, even though it is some people are pushing for this particular solution. And what happens then is the third unusual element in the story, perhaps a unique element in this story. What happens next is again that the rabbinate takes initiative, and the rabbinate does something that is as unprecedented as their first appeal to the bishop of Kamieniec, and as unprecedented as the Frankist use of the blood libel. Namely, the rabbinate decides that they would ask the Catholic Church to convert the Christians to Catholicism. Now, this element is this is probably many people do not imagine this today, but this is as much of a breaking of the taboo as is the blood libel and petitioning the Christians to burn Jewish heretics at the stake. Conversion to Christianity is probably the strongest taboo in early modern Judaism. There is a number of rabbinic responsa in which the rabbis are debating what to do in a situation where you have whether you should excommunicate a person who threatens that if excommunicated, they would convert to Christianity. And the answer to this is you can do it, but you shouldn't. You should, essentially, the conversion to Christianity is so much of a taboo that the Jews are trying to keep even the worst offenders, even the worst criminals within the Jewish fold. There are very few cases in which rabbinic authorities are trying to push people out of Judaism, and this is one of these cases. The Stadland, the intercessor of the Council of Four Lands, of the supreme authority of Polish Jewry at the time, is essentially bribing the Christian authorities to accept Frankists into Christianity, and indeed. The Frankists are caught between the rock and the hard place. They are pushed towards the Baptists. They are pushed by the rabbis on the one hand and the priests on the other, and indeed they convert. Indeed, in summer and fall 1759, early 1760, approximately 3,000 Jews convert into Roman Catholicism in Lviv and surrounding places. And this is where Frankism as a movement within Christianity begins. I think I will end here. This is right. This is the beginning of Frankism and how unusual it was, and I will be happy to answer your questions if you have any.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Pawel. There's already a lot to chew on, and I do want to encourage people to put their questions in the Q&A section. I know that a number have already come in, and we want to get to those. I wanted to start off. I'm not an historian. I'm a modern literature person, but to ask you about, I know from reading Tokarczuk's novel that she thanks you in her acknowledgments, and just to ask what were your interactions with this literary author? What did she approach you for? How does an historian and a scholar play a role in a work of the literary imagination?
Well, I've known Olga Tokarczuk for many years, and I don't even remember anymore how we first met. But I've known Olga for a long time, and when she started working on her book, she got in touch with me. My book was almost ready then, and then it came out. So I sent her a copy of the English edition. There wasn't a Polish edition back then. She read it. She used it in her book the way she used it. She also asked me all kinds of questions, and I also read the first draft of the book before it was published in Polish. I made some suggestions. Also sent her some other papers of mine on Sabbatianism. And she used it. I think you can, like, if you read both books, you can see how she utilized my research and used it for her purpose.
So can I follow up a couple more questions about the Tokarczuk side? What's the element in the novel that I maybe as an historian rankles?
I don't know. If I were to be very honest, I'm not a great fan of historical novels. I think, to begin with, it's not a genre that, whether because I am a professional historian or because this is not the type of literature I like, and I don't think that it's Olga's best book. I know that it's her most famous book. In some ways, this is the book that brought her the Nobel Prize. But I think she is a much better writer in shorter forms that are not necessarily historical. I don't know how to answer. Maybe because the subject is so close to me, because I worked it on for so long. I think one thing which I liked about the book, Olga's book, is that she tried to bring into it all kinds of contexts. For instance, all kinds of historical figures which, to the best of our knowledge, our historical knowledge, had no contact whatsoever with Frank and his followers, and probably not even knowledge about this movement, but could have had. Right, so she has the poetess Elżbieta Drużbacka. She has Chmielowski, the author of the first Polish encyclopedia. Now, these people were not involved, as far as we as far as we know, as far as the historical sources allow us to tell, but they were in the same time, the same place, more or less, and they could have had some impact on the movement, and they could have had some knowledge of Frank. I think this is interesting, right? This what if kind of history there.
That's great. Yeah, I actually agree. My favorite of her novels available in English is Primeval and Other Stories. Although I find the books of Jacob fascinating. Last moderator privilege question, and actually one that is both more historical and perhaps more prurient and salacious. Both in the novel and in your study, you take up the issue of, I think certainly for us today, a quite curious hospitality custom, sort of a bed warming for among Jewish guests. Can you say a little bit about this and put it into some sort of context? Was this something peculiar to Frankists or post-Sabbateans? Was it Jewish? Was it Christian? Where does this come from?
No, it is Jewish. It is Sabbatean. In general, Sabbatianism has this very pronounced antinomian element, right? The element in which there is a ritual of violating rituals, or rituals of violating commandments, and this is particularly pronounced among the followers of Shabtai Tzvi in the Ottoman Empire. And this custom is practiced by the Ottoman Sabbatians. There is even a PhD in Hebrew written by someone at the Hebrew University, which has an entire chapter on sexual hospitality and on how the ritual was practiced among Turkish Sabbatians, and how it was interpreted. Again, sexual hospitality is known to exist in the ancient Middle East. So, and those who practiced it, the Jewish sectarians who practiced it, basically claimed that they follow biblical precedents. That they are renewing.
I should say, for those who I was a little bit oblique, but this is a custom. If a Jewish guest would come to your house, you would have your wife share their bed, a kind of sexual hospitality, right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. So I want to get to some of the questions that have come through on the Q&A. A number of them are asking how the phenomenon of Frankism connects with other historical and messianic or quasi-messianic developments before and after the movement. So maybe I can bundle them a little bit, one guest has asked about the earlier figure of Shlomo Molko, about Frank's version of Judaism and its connection with Kabbalah and Zohar, and then after the movement about I guess maybe parallels to turning to the authorities between the Mitnagdim and the Hasidim, about essentially going to the authorities to try to crack down, the Christian authorities to try to crack down on your opponents. Can you speak to maybe that kind of broader context where how we should understand Frank and what happened in Poland at the time?
Yes. So as far as what had been before, right? The only direct connection is Sabbatianism. Shlomo Molcho, you can come up with all kinds of parallels. You can argue find all kinds of analogies to other messianic phenomena in Judaism, but there's no direct historical connection. The only direct historical connection is Shabtai Tzvi. As what came after, this is a big debate in scholarship. There are scholars, Gershom Scholem being one of them, who argued that yes, Frankism in different ways affected the Haskalah movement, the Reform movement, and the Hasidic movement. So three large religious phenomena in 19th century Judaism. And Scholem argues for it on two levels. One is showing direct connections, namely showing that some people who were members of Frankist group in different places then became Reform rabbis, Maskilim, or Hasidim. There aren't many cases like this, but there are some prominent cases like this. So you can show that the Maskilim, the proponents of Haskalah in Prague or wider in Bohemia, came from Frankist families. For that matter, the great Justice Louis Brandeis came from a Frankist family and was very proud of it. Or Reform rabbis, Rabbi Aaron Hor in Hungary comes from the Frankists. So this is one element. And then Scholem argues that there are also some ideological similarities, right? That some of the Maskilic ideas and some of the Hasidic ideas are the Frankist ideas that underwent some kind of transformation. Personally, I'm quite skeptical. I am not going in this direction in my own research, and I am not fully convinced by Scholem. But as I said, there is a scholarly debate. Scholem is the most prominent, but it's not the only one. There are also other scholars who would argue for a direct connection between Frankism on the one hand and then Reform Judaism, Haskalah, and Hasidism on the other.
Great. And very basically, are there any Frankists today in Poland or I suppose anywhere?
No, not that I know of. Not that I know of. To the best of my knowledge, it also depends how you define Frankists, of course. But a movement as a religious movement disappeared already in the 19th century, in the first half of the 19th century. The movement, the Frankism as a social phenomenon, right? It's a group of families who tend to monopolize certain businesses, intermarry between each other, help each other in various ways. In this sense, it existed longer. Like you have a group of Frankist families in Warsaw. They are perfectly Orthodox Roman Catholics, but they still live separately until the late 19th century, possibly the eve of the First World War, but not later than that. There's no evidence of anything after the First World War.
Great, thank you. One reader of the novel and your book as well asks if there's any basis for there's a character in the novel who literally floats through the entire book, the character of Yenta, this undying Jewish woman who witnesses much of the novel as a kind of disembodied spirit. Is there any precedent for that?
No, this is 100% Olga Tokarczuk. There's nothing in there comes from my research or me, and no, this is 100% Olga. Okay,
that probably is also an answer to the question from one guest asking whether you're entitled to any part of the Nobel Prize money. So I guess we have to give Olga credit for much of the creation there. let's see. So maybe one question is about the kind of the emergence of these different messianic groups and the what causes it, and you're referring to the pogroms in the 17th century, but maybe kind of focusing on the 18th century and the emergence of Frankism. What do you see as you've talked about these striking novelties, the ways in which it was a continuity from Sabbatinism, and then ways in which we get these extraordinary developments of going to the authorities, blood libel accusations, encouraging conversion to Christianity. Why these seemingly radical changes?
I don't have a good answer. I mean, I have several answers, but I don't think that there is an obvious trigger or one a clear reason that clear explanation of what happens there. I think part of it is Frank's personal charisma. I do think that he's extraordinary character, and he's clearly very charismatic, and many people who follow him just follow him because he's so charismatic. Part of it is, and this is again the modified Scholem's argument, is saying that many people see it as a vehicle of emancipation. Especially those, this doesn't work, of course, after they convert to Christianity. But at some point, it seems to be a promise of emancipation without assimilation. In other words, on the one hand, leaving the confines of the normative, or to put it in a slightly anachronistic way, Orthodox Judaism, and at the same time obtaining some kind of legitimacy as the reformed Jewish group. I think it's extremely attractive for many people, and I think this is why many of them are following Frank. I think these two elements are crucial, but none of them is a sufficient explanation, and none of them is an explanation in itself.
What does it look like? I'm kind of riffing here on a question that Boris has asked. What do looking at the sources, what do the Polish sources look like as opposed to either the Frankist sources or the anti-Frankist Jewish sources? What's it like looking through Polish documents at this phenomenon?
Well, the main sources are in Polish. The main Frankist sources are in Polish. Okay. In fact, Frank's teachings are formulated in Polish. They're formulated much later. It really starts. We don't have Frank. We know very little about Frank's teachings at the beginning of the movement, except for the motions for the disputations, this kind of things, right? But he didn't write anything, and his teachings were recorded much later, were recorded by his followers in Polish. So the key sources are in Polish. The most important Frankist manuscripts, they were published, but they were published by scholars in the 20th century, are Polish sources, and like pretty much everything that we know about Frank's original teachings, we know from Polish sources.
Thanks. Alex asks if, and I seem to remember something of this in the novel, whether drugs or psychedelics were used by the Frankists.
Not that I know of, no.
Great. Maybe, sorry, let me see if any new questions have come through. Yes. So one question, whether there is a relationship between, again, I think that the broader context is if there's a relationship between Frankist and Maritism, but also a couple different questions that talk about people who were actual or rumored to be of Frankist descent, Mickiewicz, the poet, and another question about Louis Brandeis's mother, kind of what that background may entail.
Yes, no, the Mickiewicz and Brandeis are completely different cases. Brandeis comes I didn't mention it in my talk because it's later, but for various reasons, Frank's followers in the Czech lands, in Bohemia and Moravia, did not convert to Christianity. So his followers unlike his followers in Poland, or unlike the majority of his followers in Poland, Czech Frankists are Jewish Frankists, are Frankists who are ostensibly
Orthodox Frankists.
Orthodox Frankists, exactly. And there is a number of very prominent Frankist family in Prague. The richest and most prominent Jewish families in Prague in the second half of the 18th century, the early 19th century, are Frankists, and this is the milieu from which Brandeis came from. And as I said, Brandeis himself was very proud of his origin. Scholem published The Last Will from the Brandeis family. Just if anyone is interested, it can be read. It's in Scholem's collection of essays. That's called The Messianic Idea in Judaism, and there you'll find everything that you want to know about Brandeis. This is Brandeis. Now Mickiewicz. Again, there is a debate among Polish historians and Polish scholars. It's extremely unlikely that Mickiewicz came from a Frankist family. It's not impossible, but it's extremely unlikely. What we do not for certain, that his first wife, Maria Szymanowska, was from a very prominent Frankist family. And a really interesting question to which I don't have an answer. It's not my field, but there is a great book to be written. Not so much whether Mickiewicz was a Frankist, right? But whether Frank's ideas had any impact on Mickiewicz, because it's very, very likely that he was exposed to Frank's teachings, and then the question is if and how they affected his poetry or his messianic writing. Right? He also has messianic writing, Christian messianic writings. So tracing this connection would be fascinating. I haven't done it. I'm not planning to do it, but there is a very interesting book to be written.
And possibly an historical novel as well.
Possibly.
So on that last note, any advice for those of us who are going to pick up Tokarczuk's novel? Advice from the historian about how we might read it, what we might keep in mind as we read it, for those of us who also will be back here in May for the book discussion.
Well, I don't know. I think you should just enjoy it. It's a novel, right? It's not a like. Look, if you, I think my book gives enough historical background, but I don't think you really need that much of historical background to enjoy the novel. Like, I can point to all kinds of historical inaccuracies in the novel, but I think it's not. There's no point. It's not about it, right? So just enjoy it.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you so much. This is really wonderful. A fascinating, great background, and inspiring again for those of us who will enjoy the novel as well and go on to our next event in May. So thank you so much for joining us and
Thank
teaching
you very
us.
much.
Thank you for everyone who attended, and I hope to see many of you on May 15th. Once again, the link is in the chat room, or visit our website at the university. So thanks, everyone.